The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday, October 11th. I hope everybody's having a fantastic weekend. It's the weekend. All right, I know there's a lot of news happening right now, and we could have done another news show today. Suddenly, there's stuff coming out of Gaza that's pretty horrific. There's a new trade war with China is just being escalated into the stratosphere. That is going to be fun to watch. And there's a bunch going on. But I decided we should take a break from news a little bit, just to back a little bit from it. I've also promised more. What do you call it? Yuan's Rules for Life kind of shows. So this will be a part of that, and we'll take that on. So we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about marriage, the value of marriage, and the benefits of it, and why you should do it, generally speaking. And we'll also talk about prenup arrangements because, yeah, I guess it's big right now. The Free Press had a big article about prenups just this last week. Why everyone is getting a prenup. So we'll talk about my views on prenups. And I also got a question from David, who is a long time and significant supporter of the show via PayPal or Patreon or one of these. About prenups. He wanted me to comment on prenups and thought it would make a good topic for a show. So we're gonna do that as well. And I've got a question more broadly about marriage that I got a few months ago, or a few weeks ago. Looks like a few months ago. That we will cover and talk about as well, because I think it is of interest. So that's the topics. Monday, or maybe even tomorrow, but Monday we'll talk about tariffs and trade wars and Gaza. A lot of talk about Gaza. Really awful things happening there right now. But by Monday we'll have the hostages released. That'll definitely be in the news, so that'll be good. And so there's a lot to talk about over the next week in terms of news. Today we're talking about marriage and prenups and so on. I thought we'd start with prenups, and then we'll go to marriage. And I'm eager to encourage you to ask questions. Ask questions like. Somebody said I should run a Dear Abby's like show. So feel free to ask Dear Abby like questions. If you've got questions about life, marriage, relationships, love, sex, whatever, romance, ask those. You can also ask about anything, really. I've already got a question about Taiwan. Ask about anything, and that all works. So feel free to use the super chat to ask about anything you want. All right, so let's jump in with prenups. And then we'll broaden the discussion from there to marriage. We'll broaden it to marriage. Period. It doesn't need to be a continuation of that sentence. All right. So it turns out that prenups are big right now. Like everybody, most people who are getting married right now, 50% really, of people getting married right now are using a prenup. A prenup basically is a contract you sign before marriage. We'll get into some of the clauses that are in these prenups. We'll get into some of the things that people put in that are often not legally valid. And let me just say, right off the bat, I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I say here should be taken as legal advice. That should be self-evident, should be obvious. Not a lawyer, don't know the details. reading off of what I'm reading online. So people try to put in all kinds of provisions which turn out to be non-enforceable by the courts, but sometimes they are enforceable. So sometimes it's hard to tell. So people just stick them in there and worry about it later. So a prenup is basically a contract that states primarily with regard to assets, primarily with regard to income and assets. What happens when the marriage is dissolved, and for that matter, who owns particular assets while the marriage is in place? I mean, a prenup can't specify that, let's say, one of the parties might have a business, and that business is 100% theirs, even after the marriage. Whereas, and I think this is, and prenups used to be really, really rare. So in the 1990s, supposedly, about 8% of married couples had one. That's according to the Free Press. And when they did happen, it was kind of whispered about in scandalized tones. It was something you gossiped about, or something the really rich did, and the famous, and people who divorced many times, but it wasn't something normal people, average people did. When I got married, which is way before the 90s, or well, a decade before the 90s, didn't know there was such a thing when I got married. But I got married very young. We'll get to that because I think it's important in terms of thinking about prenups as well. Age is very relevant. So today, 47%, according to some surveys, are getting prenups, and some people believe the number's even higher than that. That's among millennials, and I guess with Gen Zers, it's about the same. So it's over 40% of millennials and Gen Zers are getting prenups. And the question is why, and does it make sense, and what do I think? Do I think it's a good idea or a bad idea? Let's talk about what a prenup kind of is first. I mean, it's a contract. It's a contract that settles issues around assets and money, and tries to determine the allocation of such in case of divorce. What happens in divorce? And let's start with a big challenge with a prenup. I mean, the biggest challenge of a prenup is that it's a very long-term contract. And it's a contract that covers huge amounts of, if you will, uncertainty, huge amounts of uncertainty about the future, and what are going to be the circumstances around the future. For example, some of the provisions that courts deem unenforceable are provisions in prenups dealing with unborn children. That is, dealing with children that you're going to have in the future. And I think the courts are saying you're not in a position before you have kids to project some kind of decisions about how you're going to, in a divorce after you have kids, custody, alimony, all that stuff. That needs to be done after you've had the kids. So children, and the impact of children have on a marriage, and the impact of children have on your finances. Financial prospects of each one of the partners in the marriage, the kind of jobs that they're going to get, the kind of businesses they're going to start, the kind of prospects that they have. There's a huge uncertainty about that into the future. There's uncertainty about obviously whether you're going to be happy together, the kind of marriage, the kind of relationship, the kind of communication you have, the dynamics of the relationship. There's a lot of uncertainty about that. Uncertainty if you project further in, uncertainty about retirement. When you retirement, people are retiring early these days. A big payoff. And then, of course, there's another aspect of this, and that is inheritance. I mean, how dealing with inheritance. Will you have an inheritance? It's decades into the future. So the biggest challenge with a prenup is that you're dealing with a lot of moving pieces, a lot of uncertainty about over a very long period of time. Now, it could be the marriage is short, if the marriage is going to be 5 years, 10 years, and it ends then it's fairly easy. It's not that hard to predict what's going to happen over a decade or so. But once you start talking about several decades, it's just hard to think into the future. By the way, one of the kinds of provisions that some prenups have is some of them have sunset clauses where the prenup goes away after a certain period of years, and others have review clauses, typically optional review clauses, that the agreement is revised upon some major life change like children, business success, or something like that. And all right. So these are the kind of things that a prenup is supposed to handle, and the challenge that it faces, because I think that challenge comes from the complexity and the scope, the length of time that this contract is going to be in place, and trying to deal with things that one just doesn't know what's going to happen. I mean, most contracts are much more finite. Most contracts are much more narrow. Most contracts deal with a finite set of circumstances, a finite set of events. There's a lot about marriage which is very open-ended. So that's a challenge. On the other hand, marriage is maybe the most important relationship you will have in your life. It is a long-term relationship. It is a long-term relationship that involves a lot. It involves every aspect of your life, and it does involve money and finances, and it does involve a lot of decision making, and ultimately will involve children. And it is a relationship that can end. We know, something like 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And it's not just divorce. Death is another way a marriage can end. And one should think about what happens when one party dies, and how do their estate, their assets, how are they dealt with. So, given the importance of the relationship, the length of time, and the complexity involved, I think a prenup makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense in, I'd say, most circumstances of marriage. You want to have some guiding principles that you agree upon. Now, I think it's something that should be reviewed and revised over time. Again, mutual agreement. But it certainly makes sense to have a contract that lays out the principles by which you want to handle the end of that marriage, if it comes. And one of the reasons in the 90s there were almost no prenups, and certainly I don't remember them even existing, and certainly it was not something when we got married, even considered, is because one of the issues is when you get married, right? Like if you get married like I did, really, 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 really young. I got married when I was 21. My wife, still my wife, was 19. We were really, really young. And part of being really, really, really young was we had no assets. I mean, literally, zero, nothing, no assets. And we had no real idea about what assets we were going to have. We were literally at the very beginning of life. To have a prenup under those circumstances makes no sense. Under those circumstances, you're basically forming a partnership with the understanding that you're going to work things out as you go along. And that everything is owned 50-50 because you formed this partnership. And you're doing it together, and you're at such a beginning of life that everything that is created from now on is being created jointly. So if you enter a marriage in a position of literally having no assets, and you don't know what the future is, and you're literally going to make the future together. You're going to create the future together. Then a prenup makes absolutely no sense. Although, I mean, I will say this, and this is something you always need to think about. Whether you have a prenup or not, there is a contract. The contract's implicit, of course, in the very marriage, but the state imposes terms on you. So if you don't have a prenup, then you're leaving it up to the courts to decide how your estate is going to be split, and so on. And and there are lots of horror stories about people believing, justly or unjustly, hard to tell, that they were screwed by the courts. So given that you're going to have an imposition of some kind of legal regime on you, you might want to spell out that regime in advance for yourself. And maybe, even if you get married very, very early and with no assets, you should spell out something like, okay, from now it's 50-50, we're in partnership. And if we split, we split down the middle or whatever, things like that, right? Just so that you don't get into a situation later on where somehow, there's the courts do it differently or impose something different on you. So, when I got married, I literally had nothing. So in a Jewish wedding, and we had to have a religious ceremony because even though we were both atheists when we got married, in Israel it doesn't count unless it's a religious wedding. You can leave Israel and get a secular wedding outside of Israel and come back and they'll recognize it. But if you get married in Israel, it has to be a religious wedding. It could be a Christian wedding, a Muslim wedding, a Baha'i wedding. It could be lots of different religions. But it has to be a religious authority signing off on it. So we had to get a religious wedding. And in a religious wedding in Israel, you have in a sense, a contract. And it's only a one-sided contract because it's the male who is signing the contract, making certain promises about what happens if the marriage gets dissolved in terms of his liability, responsibility for the woman. So it's a very patriarchal system. So I sit down with the rabbi, and I didn't know what the hell. And he reads you. It's a standard contract. He reads you all the stuff. I can't remember what was in it. And there is a provision there where you have to say, if we get divorced, if this marriage gets dissolved, you will give your wife X amount of money. Fill in the blank, right? Whatever. And and now this contract is not legally binding. So what happens is, in Israel, people just stick a number in there, and they usually put a big number in because they want to impress everybody. And they know it's unenforceable in the courts anyway. So it's like a prenup that is reflective of intentions, but not enforceable. So people stick in $1 million, whatever. They put in there a lot of money because, again, it's just to impress the people at the wedding, and it's not enforceable. This contract, by the way, is held by the mother of the bride. So again, symbolically, you as the husband don't ever have access to it. It's a kind of a promissory note hanging out there, but it's more a moral claim than it is a legal claim. Anyway, so the rabbi's reading this thing to me, and he gets to, well, how much money? And I think, God, I'm not gonna promise to give more money than I have, right? I'm not gonna put a number in there that I can't actually live up to. So how much money do I have? And at that point in my life, all the money I had in the world, the value of all the assets I had in the world, was about $200. I kid you not. That's all I had. Had about $200. So I said $200 and I think 25 cents or something like that. Basically, the exact balance in my checking in my bank account. The rabbi looked at me like I'm nuts, And I said, no, that's how much money I have. And literally, this is read in public. And it was a big embarrassment, I think, for for the family when they got to that section. The fact that all I was willing to put up was the $200, which is all I literally had, right? All I literally had. So yeah, I mean, when we started, we started with nothing. Neither of us had anything. So we were both going to go to school. We were both going to work while we were at school. I think our parents helped us a little bit. And we were going to make our way in life. I mean, and ultimately we moved to the United States. We came to the United States with nothing. It was zero. And then I spent 6 years in school, and we had 2 kids while I was in school when we had nothing. So for a very, very long time, we never thought of ourselves as poor, but we were technically quite poor, and had nothing. Diapers were our largest expense, and by then we were already in our late 20s. Anyway, so maybe a prenup makes sense in those circumstances, just to set out kind of the standards of how we're thinking about this, what it should be. But I think it's less important if you have nothing. And if you have an understanding about what's important is to talk about it, have an understanding about how you want to live your life more than anything else. The flip side of that is that today you guys are getting married much later in life. And you are much richer when you get married. Typically today, you're getting married in your 30s, maybe in your late 20s. You're after school. You've already got a career. You've got income. Maybe both of you have income. You might even own some property. You might have 401ks and investment accounts. Some of you have started businesses and already, maybe, many of you might even have had an exit in a business and sitting on millions of dollars in the bank account. So I think the more assets you bring into a relationship, and the more you kind of now have an understanding of the relative earning power of both, the more prenup makes sense. And, how you structure it and what you decide to do, and whether you decide to commingle everything and say it's all 50-50, or whether you carve out certain things or not. I mean, that's, I don't have a position about what should be in the prenup. But what I think is incredibly valuable, what the prenup really facilitates more than anything else, and why I would be very much in favor of a prenup, is it facilitates communication. It forces you basically to sit down and talk about finance, talk about money, talk about income, talk about intentions, talk about plans, talk about how you see your career going, talk about expectations about whether you both intend to work, whether when you have kids, will one of you stop working, whether one of you might be, I don't know, a teacher who's never going to make a lot of money. Talk about all that. I mean, my suggestion is throw it all in the pot and agree to 50-50, that basically everything is commingled and everything's shared, and you make decisions together, financial decisions and life decisions generally. Now, but if there's a massive imbalance, I don't know, one side is worth tens of millions of dollars, the other's worth nothing, then yeah, I mean, maybe that's not how you want to do it. Particularly if you don't know how long the marriage is going to last. I mean, you intend it to last for a long time, but you don't know. Then having some provisions to protect the person coming in with a lot of money, or expects a huge inheritance or whatever. all of that, it makes sense maybe to carve some of that out. But all of that, it makes sense to think about in advance and to lay it out and to talk about it. The talking about it is the most valuable thing here. And then to the extent that, you should put it in writing to a large extent because you want to preempt whatever state law is going to dictate. This way, you get to decide in advance what it's going to be like, how assets are going to be split, how they're going to be dealt with in case of a dissolution or in case of death, rather than some judge. So, to me, it just makes enormous amount of sense to make as much as you can, and you can't do a lot, but as much as you can, make it explicit. And again, talk about it. And what makes sense to put in writing, and put into the contract. So, things like, here's some basic stuff that go into prenups. First of all, full financial disclosure. So you disclose to each other what your assets are, what you have, what you own, everything. It all goes in, real estate, stock portfolios, everything go in. So first, there's 100% visibility before the wedding actually happens. And then you decide what is going to be marital property and what's going to be separate property. I know people who were married and kept separate bank accounts, and I'm sure some of you maybe have separate bank accounts. And, I think that can probably work for some people. We've never had that. It doesn't make any sense for us. And, with one bank account, we make decisions together. Any significant financial decision we make together. But everything is commingled, but it makes sense for some people, or at least a portion of their income goes into separate bank accounts, while a chunk goes into a combined bank account. Again, you can make a variety of different arrangements. You can have a variety of different arrangements, and they can make sense. So I don't think there's one way to do this. This is one of the benefits of talking it through, is to figure out what your preferences are and what works for the two of you. In a prenup, you would talk about what happens if a business that one of you owns grows dramatically afterwards. How are you going to handle that? Again, who does it belong to? Is it marital property or is the business separate? What about new assets? New assets that are bought, does it depend if it's bought from your separate accounts or if it's bought from the joint account? How are you going to handle all that? And then, of course, what are you going to do with real estate? And again, what happens under divorce? And for all of these, what happens under death? And this is part of, a prenup can be part of, thinking about an estate plan. Another thing you should all do is have a will. And if you have significant assets, have an estate plan. Lay it out exactly how you want this done. Both, particularly once you have children. You need to handle things like that. Then what about spousal support, alimony? If you get divorced, is there some agreement around this? Is it something you want to re-examine once you have kids? Again, if you start putting in provisions around kids, most courts won't accept it. If you're going to have alimony, if you're going to put that into the prenup, which might be the case if one party is bringing a huge amount of assets into the relationship, there might be a promise of alimony in the case of separation. But if so, how much? For how long? And if you're not going to have alimony, if you both decided you are not going to have alimony, you have to make that explicit, because again, I think the courts will err on the side of pro-alimony. And by the way, courts have often stricken out clauses around alimony if they think it's, quote, grossly unfair when it's enforced relative to when it was signed. So get legal advice. one of the things that they recommend in terms of prenups is that each party should have their own lawyer, and you should really take it seriously. It's a contract, just like any other contract. Business interests, how the ownership, the profits, how do they handled? Does the spouse have a claim? Do they have involvement? If they don't have involvement, do they have a claim? All of that. Again, there's no one way to do this, but it should be discussed. And then what happens to a business if you do get divorced? Who owns the business? What happens to it? And then inheritances, particularly these days. I mean, millennials and Gen Zers are going to inherit trillions of dollars from baby boomers who are going to be dying here soon. I mean, this is a massive generation that's accumulated a lot of wealth, and they're going to be handing that wealth to millennials and Gen Zers. And it's a lot of money. And for some families, it's a huge amount of money. Well, how are you going to treat that? There's not much you can say in a prenup about children. As I said, if you have existing children, you can and you should. But in terms of future children, again, courts won't uphold that much. And then what about debts? A lot of people today have student debts. They have other debts. How are those going to be handled going into a marriage? Are you both liable for them? Are they separate somehow? Are they going to be taken care of out of the joint account? Are the debts, what happens in a divorce if you still have those debts? If one party takes on gambling debts, what happens? I mean, what happens to debts? Right? And then can one spouse become liable for the personal debts of another of his spouse or her spouse? So these are the kind of things. These are the kind of things that a prenup covers. And again, to me, it makes complete sense to have one. Not just when there's an imbalance in terms of one party has more assets than the other, but just in terms of getting everything on the table and deciding how you want your life to work together. Now, again, in my case, because we were so young, everything was assumed that everything was going to be together, everything was going to be shared because we were going to share a life together almost from the beginning. There was no, everything we did together at that point, from that point on. So it's impossible to separate it out. It's certainly impossible to predict that. But once you get into your 30s, you have assets, there's a separation, there's a clear understanding of that separation. It makes sense to putting in writing. And even if you decide to merge everything, which I think makes sense for most people, put that in writing. Make it clear that that's what you want, and that's what your intention is, and how you intend to deal with it once you're separate. I assume, again, separate it out 50-50. Now, there's some crazy provisions people try to put into prenups. These are funny. They're funny and they're crazy, and most of them would get thrown out by court. But that doesn't mean then that they don't enter into prenups. There are, for example, weight clauses. If you gain more than X number of pounds after the wedding, or you get fined, or the prenup is void, or you lose X amount of money from your account if you have a separate account, or if we do get divorced and you've put on a lot of weight, then you get less alimony. Now, supposedly these are in several celebrity prenups. I did read in the Free Press article that a provision like this was actually upheld by a court, and where somebody got penalized, I guess $10,000 for every 10 pounds they gained or something like that. And this was upheld by a court. But from everything else I've seen, usually these are not enforced by the courts, right? But they do sometimes. There are other provisions around cheating, right? So you can be fined anywhere supposedly between $50,000 and $5 million if you're unfaithful. I don't know if this is per occurrence and how you measure occurrences. Supposedly, Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas have a $5 million adultery clause. Again, not clear if any of this is upheld, would be upheld by a court, but it seems kind of weird. It just seems weird. Both the weight and the pen, all of these are kind of, I mean, first of all, is it really about money? If there's cheating going on, is that going to resolve the issue? And is money supposed to stop somebody from cheating? Is that oh shit, I'm not going to cheat on my wife because that I mean I have to pay her $50,000. No, I'm not going to do that. I'll stop cheating because I don't want to lose the money. Is that really what you want as the motivation? Is that really how it should function? It strikes me as a cheapening of the relationship to provide incentives like that not to cheat, right? I mean, quite dishonesty should be a basis for separation and divorce. How you decide to manage your sexual relationships and how close you want your marriage to be and how seriously you want to take so-called cheating is an open question that you need to decide between the two of you, and it should be discussed and debated and agreed upon between the two of you, but it shouldn't be monetized. It's not about incentives. It's about shared values and about your view of sex and about your view of what your relationship means to one another. So, and weight, God. I mean, again, this is, you really going to provide financial incentives for this? I mean, isn't this about self-respect and about and all kinds of extraneous circumstances? What if one of the couple gets sick and part of being sick puts on weight? I mean, how do you? It seems like that is a ridiculous kind of a provision. Another one that they have in there is a frequency of intimacy clauses. How many times a week you have sex? And I guess penalties against the party who doesn't want to have sex. And if it's less than twice a week or whatever, you get penalized for it if we get divorced one day. Again, it doesn't strike me that sex should be something that is monetized. Not very romantic, but sex should be. I have no problem with sex being scheduled and sex being thought about and making sure that you have sex often enough, but that should be part of an ongoing discussion and your ongoing relationship. That should not be predetermined. And plus, all of that changes over time. It changes with children. It changes with age. It changes with, busyness, and you can't regulate that. Travel. I mean, there's so many circumstances in which you couldn't live up to the frequency and intimacy clause. And is the prenup really going to specify all the exceptions for that? Some people have in-laws clauses. In-laws. One spouse cannot have the mother-in-law move in or visit for more than X days. Now, I have a huge amount of sympathy for this clause. I think that makes a lot of sense. But again, this is the kind of thing that I don't think you put into a legal document. It's the kind of thing you manage and you agree upon. I don't know. It's weird to talk about this in advance. But if there's a particularly clingy in-law, or if your spouse to be is particularly clingy to their parents, it certainly might be something to talk about. You do not want in-laws in your life too much. I'm not against in-laws in your life, but they shouldn't be in your life too much. And what is too much? That's up to you. I guess I moved 7,000 miles away from my in-laws and my own parents. That gives you an indication of my view of how involved in-laws should be. You need to make those decisions, and those should be things you should talk about. Social media clauses. This is a weird one. No posting embarrassing or flattering photos. Like, if your spouse is posting unflattering, embarrassing, photos, and you ask them not to, and they don't pay any attention to it, you've got some problems in your marriage, in your relationship. And I don't think that is something that should be negotiated up front. I think you should just agree to take each other seriously, and to, when somebody has concerns about your behavior, if your spouse has concerns about your behavior, you agree to take them seriously. But how many photos and what kind? There are others, appearance upkeep. I guess in some couples have this. They specify that cosmetic surgery costs will be covered by the joint account, I guess. They also specify that each spouse will maintain their attractiveness. You assign in your 20s a budget for plastic surgery into your 80s. That makes a lot of sense. And then pet clauses. Pet clauses probably do make sense, particularly if you're bringing a pet into a relationship. Who gets the dog? Who gets the cat? The fact that an animal is coming into the relationship, all that makes sense. There are also other quirky stuff. People put into prenups shopping limits, vacation requirements, household duties, who does what. None of these enforceable, by the way, I think. Don't seem like they're enforceable. But again, things that you would think would be negotiated as you live your life. Like, regarding all these things are going to change over time. To think that you in your 20s or 30s can determine these kind of things 30 years into the future is just silly. Household duties, who takes out the garbage and who cooks dinner, and again, but all of that you think would change with children, with different career paths. That is something you are part of. Marriage is the constant negotiation around these things, the constant understanding of who does what. If you're not willing to engage in ongoing, constant negotiating around these things, then don't get married. Career conditions, I guess, whose career is more important? I don't know. You can imagine move clauses. If a job requires a move, is the spouse required by contract to follow you? Again, these are the kind of things that should be negotiated within the marriage, agreed upon. But if there is, if your spouse to be tells you, look, I always, for the rest of my life, want to live in Iowa City. I'm never going to be 20 miles away from my parents and my siblings and my family, and I never want to leave Iowa City. Well, that's good to know in advance. Good to know in advance, because you might have different ambitions. So those are kind of things that are good to put on the table, good to discuss, good to talk about before you get married. One of the things that I loved about my wife is before we got married, I said something like, one day I want to move to the U.S. And my wife had never been outside Israel. She'd never been on an airplane. And her response was, when do we leave? Right? That's my kind of woman, right? Eager and excited about the adventure. If she'd said, oh no, I never want to leave Israel, that would have been a killer. Could have been a killer. Would definitely been a problem, right? So you want to know these things in advance. You want to know these things in advance. Do you want to have children? Shouldn't be in the contract, but you should know in advance. We decided when we got married, no children for at least 7 years. We had our first child 7 years later. give or take. So you want to have an understanding about these things. It's really, really important. Religion. You want to talk about religion, right? Your expectations about religion and your expectations about raising kids and religion vis-a-vis the kids. I mean, that's important. It's going to be a real point of contention if you leave it for later. Somebody upset because I haven't answered a question yet? I get to the questions afterwards, so I get to all the questions, but I get to the questions in the next few minutes. We'll get there. But once I finish my spiel, right? I don't do it while I'm doing it. So all of these kind of issues should be on the table, even if you don't really want to put them into a contract. All right, so here's my bottom line on prenups. I think they're a good idea. I think they should primarily be limited to financial issues and financial disclosure and financial planning. But they're a good idea, but they're an opportunity to bring up a lot of other issues about expectations regarding children and sex and religion and travel and where you're going to live and all these other things. Particularly, again, the older you are, the more set in your ways you are. You want to know how your spouse is also set in their ways. I mean, the younger you are, the more flexible you tend to be. The less set in your ways you are, the more you're going to grow together. The big advantage of marrying young, the significant disadvantages, but there's some real advantages. The biggest advantage of marrying young is that you grow up together. That is, you help shape each other. You literally, your values, if you do this well, if you do it right, and if you fit, you are growing your values. You're choosing your values together. You're making and creating a joint life from nothing. You come with very little baggage, with no preconditions, no set ways, no particular place, no particular money, no particular profession. And you're now going to create something, a marriage, a relationship, a joint venture, right? Together. Not as two separate entities, but together. And the later you marry, the more difficult, there's a sense in which the more difficult that togetherness is, because you're bringing so much of the kind of life you've already created for yourself into that relationship. It's why I think at some point, there's probably a sweet spot for when to get married. At some spot, it starts getting harder and harder. You've created a whole set of habits, whole set of values associated with living alone, and now it's much harder to share. Much harder to share. So anyway, that is my view of prenups. I'll see what questions you have. I did want to answer this one question. Because I thought it was a good question. It relates to a show I did in February about love and sex. If you haven't heard that show, you can check it out. It was sometime in mid-February. I did a show on love and sex. And this was the question he asked. He says, since values change over time, I wonder what you think would be helpful to prevent someone from devaluing in your life. Is there anything people can do to keep each other as their highest values? Or is it essentially fate? I think it's a really good question, because one of the great challenges is living with somebody else for a long period of time is what happens when you drift apart. And what does it mean to drift apart? What it means to drift apart is to now have different values, to be focused on or seek different things are important. And as each one of you has different values, you become less of a value to each other because there's less values overlap between you. So I think this is I mean, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a really, really important question, and it's one that is particularly as you get engaged in different careers, or if one spouse is taking care of the kids and the other is working, you can see how that drift can happen. You're engaged in work all the time, and they're engaged in child rearing, and you've got different sets of problems, and you suddenly find that you're thinking about different things, and your different energy levels, and your different perspectives on the future and the present and everything. It's hard. So how do you work at? Is it possible, first of all, to work at keeping your values aligned, or is it just fate? Is it just going to work or not going to work? And I'm not a big believer in fate. I am a big believer in working on stuff, and sometimes you do it more consciously, and sometimes you do it less consciously. But I think the right approach is to always find those values that you share that are important to both of you, and cultivate those. Spend time on those. Invest in those, while appreciating the fact that you're also going to have separate values, interests that are not aligned. But show respect for the values of the other. That is, the fact that somebody has a value that is not yours. My wife loves learning languages, or she loves dancing. I don't like dancing, and I have no interest in foreign languages. But I have a huge amount of respect for the fact that she values these things, that she's passionate about them, and I give her the space and encouragement and support to pursue the things that she loves and engages, including the fact that I don't dance, so she gets to dance with other guys. And that's just part of her love of dance. There's no other way to do it, right? So the one way is to allow your spouse to grow, never to hold them back, to give them space, to grow, to give them space to seek out those values. But to establish as much as possible a base where your values are shared. For us, for example, a love of art, right? We both learned about art together. She more so than I, because she has degrees in it. But we learned about art. We've collected art. We go to museums together. We go to opera together. We go to concerts together. We're constantly engaged in this pursuit together. She's an artist. I'm not. But I love art, so it's a shared value, and we grow together. Having children, loving those children, investing in those children, raising those children, being involved in that, having that shared value constantly. For us, Objectivism, the philosophy of Objectivism, we learned it together. We studied it together. I studied it more seriously because my inclination is more intellectual. But she took all of Leonard Peikoff's courses, and we took them together, and we went over OPA. She was in the study group when we did OPA together. We did it all together so that we shared in that love of the philosophy. Conferences together, events together, lectures together. So we share in that. So you've got to find those values that you share, which brought you together, hopefully, and then cultivate them together and make sure that you're allocating time to cultivating your shared values. You're each going to go off and do your thing, invest in your values, do the thing that interests you separately, and you've got to each give space to the other to be able to do that. And then you've got to come together to, together experience and work on and invest in the values that you share. Right? And you've got to invest in that. It won't just happen. It's easy to drift apart. That's easy. That's inertia. That's fate. The work has to be done in finding the shared values and investing in those shared values and devoting the time to the shared values and devoting time to one another, spending time with one another. And doing that when life is crazy and you have kids running around and it's insane, or when the job is really, really tough, or when you're traveling a lot, or find the time to spend time together and invest in that relationship and invest in those values. Sex here is really important because sex is a real way in which you bond. You're bonding around pleasure. You're bonding around a shared value. You're bonding around something that you're both enjoying, that you both value, that you both, really having fun doing together. Not as much fun separately. So those are the kind of things constantly to be investing in to make sure that you don't drift apart and that you stay of value to each other. And if you have enough shared values, if you invest enough time, if you have pleasure together, if you invest in pleasure together, then it's likely you will remain each other's top value. You will remain a value to each other. But again, you have to work on it. You have to work on it. All right. Let's see. All right. Let's call that a show. That's about an hour. Wow. Okay. I talked about that for now. I didn't think I had that much to say about prenups, but there you go. Armin just came in with a $100 sticker. Thank you, Armin. Really, really, really appreciate that. Thank you. You guys can still ask questions. There's a, I think there's a lot of content here. There's a lot of stuff that can be asked if you're interested, of course. So please use the super chat to ask the question. Even with Armin, we still don't really have, we still haven't made it to our kind of target for the first hour. We have targets. The show could not be possible without support from you guys, and we have targets for that support. So please consider supporting the show and keeping the show on the air and keeping the show thriving and your host motivated. And you can do that by expressing your support, expressing the fact that you value the show with your support, financial support. That is the trade that we have. All right, let's see. Were there other stickers? Armin, thank you again. Really appreciate it. It's good to see you. Gary, thank you. Stephen, thank you. All right. So let's take some of your questions and see where we go from there. Let's start with Andrew. Paul, thank you for the sticker. Appreciate it. Andrew says, lives merge together in marriage. But that doesn't mean collectivism. Rand once said that individualists make the best husbands and wives. But she didn't expound. How do you think individualism is relevant in this context? Well, I mean, it's everything in this context. A good marriage is a marriage in which each partner in the marriage, and this is true of a partnership in business, it's true of any partnership, that each partner in the marriage has the opportunity to fully pursue their values and express who they are and what they are. And that they are pursuing their values, that they are, constantly, in a sense, making themselves better, making themselves interesting, making themselves doing things that are interesting and fun and exciting because they're individualists, because they care about themselves. It's what makes them appealing to the other partner, right? I think a nightmare marriage is when one partner grows and the other one doesn't. When one partner cares about himself or herself and builds and creates and pursues values, and the other one doesn't care about, is not selfish enough to grow. And another thing is when one partner grows and the other partner gets all of their satisfaction in life from the growth of the other partner. But they don't have a life of themselves. So they never build up their own character. They never build up their own sense of self. They never build up their own values. And then they kind of left behind. And I think a lot of marriages fall apart exactly for those reasons, because the two partners are not both growing. They're not both ambitious. They're not both achieving. I mean, think about what collectivism would mean in a marriage. It would mean you never pursue individual values. You never pursue values that you don't share. Well, you can't share all your values. We're all going to find things that are interesting that the other side doesn't find interesting. The careers are going to be different, for example. So collectivism would mean one party has to always sacrifice to the other. I don't know how you determine who sacrifices to whom, but sacrifice is needed. But again, that would create resentment. Why am I sacrificing, or why am I being sacrificed to? Either way would create resentment. And again, that would not lead to or lead to the achievement of success in marriage. Success in marriage is going to be achieved by each party pursuing their own values in harmony with the other. I mean, individualists pursue interest in harmony. Marriage is not a zero-sum world. It's an ever-growing pie. An ever-growing pie economically, hopefully, spiritually, emotionally, values-wise. You don't want to stagnate. So individualists make the best marriage partners. Individualists make the best business partners. The individualists make the best team members, because they are independent thinkers who contribute. And everybody wants to contribute to the relationship. That's a good relationship where everybody's contributing. Thank you, Andrew. Rational frontier, a connected topic. But what do you think a proper meaning of the concept of marriage is? Is it reproductive, financial, romantic, or a mixture of all? How would it be different from a serious long-term romantic relationship? I mean, the only thing that makes it different is that it's codified. It is now it represents a certain commitment, a commitment to make this a long-term relationship, make it long-term. Now, I have no problem with people not getting married. I don't think marriage is necessary. Marriage is there more to give it a contractual essence and to have basically the courts be able to facilitate any disagreements. But marriage symbolically is that long-term commitment. That's all it is. When you're living with somebody in a serious long-term relationship, you haven't made the long-term commitment. You haven't moved into the difference between that and marriage is the difference between, okay, now I'm saying, yeah, this is for as long as I can imagine. It also is I think, important for having children. Because you can have a long-term romantic relationship and you can have a contract and you can arrange your finances in a way that are fine, and if you split, it's not a problem. You can buy assets and have them split in the right way. You can manage all that. But if you have children, now it's a real complication. Children cannot be split. How do you deal with children? How do you deal with the fact that you might, divorce, if you will? Well, if you don't have the marriage contract, marriage is a contract after all, then you're going to have to make it up as you go along with regard to children, or the courts will have to step in and make decisions about it without the benefit of having a marriage contract that shapes it all. How do you shape your assets with children? So I think marriage is primarily, in terms of the contract, it's primarily there for dealing with the complexity of having children. And it's there as a long-term, as a statement to the world and to yourselves that you're making a long-term commitment. That's the roles I think marriage plays. But I have no problem with people living together and not being married and not ever getting married. I don't think marriage has any kind of sacred, something that you have to do. The most important thing is having that relationship, having that long-term close relationship. That's what you get the value from. But again, if you intend to have children, get married. It just makes it much easier, much more legally predictable. Andrew, is there a connection between envy and collectivism? God. I mean, to the extent that collectivism is based on altruism, and there's definitely a relationship between envy and altruism, then yes. I mean, envy is often a consequence of the fact that we're brought up to care about others more than about ourselves, and many people don't want that. They resent that, and they internalize that resentment, and ultimately that resentment turns into hatred of other people because they are now the focal point of my morality rather than me being the focal point of my morality. So I resent them because I'm supposed to sacrifice for them. I resent them because I'm supposed to give them stuff, or I resent them because they're supposed to sacrifice to me and they're not sacrificing. And as a consequence, I hate them, and that hatred becomes a form of envy. And of course, that is connected to collectivism, because collectivism, this idea that we're all, as individuals, don't matter. What matters is the group. It can only exist in an altruistic society that says that your life doesn't matter. What matters is their life. You should be sacrificed to them. So it's that sacrificial element is the essential in collectivism. It's what makes it work. It's what makes it stick. It what makes people adhere to it, and so it's connected to envy in that way. Mike, he says, I just got here, but I'll watch later. Looks interesting. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Appreciate the support. JJ Jigbees, you touched on this, but modern life has made it so easy to live by yourself that it seems many people find it hard to compromise. Why share a toilet, fridge, when you can easily live by yourself and still find intimacy? Well, I mean, can you really find intimacy? Can you find intimacy to the same extent as when you share a toilet and a fridge with somebody? Doesn't that force you to have the kind of intimacy that you're never going to have by yourself? You can certainly have sex without having without getting married. But can you have everything else? Can you have the experience of sharing life with somebody, of pursuing values together, and having the kind of visibility that comes from somebody who knows you intimately, not just through sex and not because you've spent a couple of weeks together, but because you've spent years and decades together. And now you know each other, and in that sense, you provide each other with the kind of visibility and the kind of support. And there is also the supporting one another when things are not so good, which I know people like Jordan Peterson emphasize, and I think wrongly they make marriage all about that. But it is a value, One of you gets sick, there's somebody to take care of you. There's somebody to make you soup. There's somebody to give to be compassionate towards you and to provide you with attention. There's a value there, but it's even more important when you're both healthy and doing fun stuff. You get to do it with somebody. Always, everywhere. And at the same time, you can also have your alone time. So it doesn't preclude that. And in a modern household, why couldn't you each have your own bathroom? If that was really important to you. Most homes have more than one toilet. And certainly we're all wealthy enough to be able to afford more than one toilet. And you can even have more than one fridge if you really wanted to. It's not that hard. So if there's certain things that bother you about living with somebody else, you can find ways around those and yet benefit from the enormity of having a loving relationship with somebody. We haven't mentioned the word love, right? But intimacy is not love. Love is much more than intimacy. Intimacy is an aspect of love. But the intimacy is much deeper and much more meaningful if love stands behind that. To have another person that represents to you a high value is an enormous benefit to you. Think of friendship on steroids, although it's even a different dimension than friendship. So, to give up having your own toilets and having your own fridge for the opportunity to spend decades with somebody you love, to share values together, to experience life together, to experience beauty together, to experience children together, to experience the successes together, but also to support one another when things are not going well, it seems like a cheap price to pay. Fridge and a toilet doesn't seem like a serious thing to worry about when the upside is so massive. And the upside is massive. Take those periods of intimacy we have with somebody in a short run and now extrapolate that to a full-fledged long-term relationship, and you get a sense of the scale of the of the benefits. And of course, again, the intimacy is far deeper, far more meaningful, because it is associated with a loving relationship and a knowledge of one another that you just can't get with, intimacy. By the way, living alone was always a possibility. We're richer today, so it's a little easier, but it's always was possible. Jacob, thank you for the sticker. Appreciate it. Eric says, I just got married 3 weeks ago. Congratulations. After 9 years together. Excellent. I'm glad you were together before you got married. That's highly recommended. Live together for a while. Have sex together for a while before you get married. Marriage is too big of a commitment, too important of a commitment, not to check it out and test it out beforehand. Sex and living together are good ways to do that. He writes, Eric says, our values align with respect to ethics, even though we disagree politically. Politics are not very important to me. Your thoughts on objectivists marrying non-objectivists? Yeah, I mean, what choice do you have? There are not enough objectivists anyway in the world. But no, I mean, it's challenging, more so than if you're both objectivists, because there's going to be things you disagree about, and they might not be important to you right now. They might be more important to you in the future. So it's going to be challenging. But if your values align around other things, and if there's real love there, and if you've lived together for 9 years and it works and you love being with one another, then the disagreements about politics or about other things are insignificant as comparative to the joy and the wonder of being together. And I would focus on that. But you do have to recognize that there will be points at which you'll be frustrated with one another. But that happens in every marriage. Even when you agree on stuff, you don't always agree on everything, right? So you just work through those things. You work through those things, and you focus on the positives, and you focus on the things you share. All right, thank you, Eric, and congratulations. Jennifer, beautiful line from Neil Peart, regarding getting to know someone. Quote, we are strangers to each other, each one's life a novel no one else has read. Even joined in bonds of love, we are linked to one another by such slender threads. Yes, although those threads get thicker and stronger and more meaningful the longer you live together, the longer you share values together, the longer you get to read each other's novels, and the longer you're writing a novel together. How's that for me riffing off of a Neil Peart? Thank you, Jennifer. Wes, thank you. Wes, $50 sticker. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you. We're chipping away at those goals. I appreciate that. All right. Jacob asks, taking us into politics, I guess. What is your revised opinion on West Taiwanese action on eastern Taiwan. He calls China West Taiwan. If yes, what form will it take? Blockade, troops on the ground, etc. Look, I don't know. But I think ultimately, the weaker America becomes, and it certainly seems like it's becoming weaker, the more likely it is that troops on the ground. I think if the Chinese are smart, they do it quickly, with overwhelming force, without any warning signs. Drop special forces into Taiwan, take out whatever defenses they have from within, flood the Taiwan Straits with ships so that even the best anti-ship defenses just get blown away by the fact that you're flooding them. Use your hypersonic missiles to take out whatever defenses they have on land and just take the island quickly. A blitzkrieg to the extent that you can do that on an island. I think that's what they do. When, I have no idea. They're probably not ready yet. And they probably want to wait until America's weaker. Although there's a chance they become weaker too. It's not clear that they're becoming stronger. Jason, thank you for the sticker. Really appreciate it. Michael, if she won't sign a prenup, she's in for something other than love. Oh God, Michael, I don't know. He's a tough one. That's for you to work out with your loved one. And I don't know that love just comes and goes based on whether they sign a prenup or not. Part of it is to explore what's stopping somebody from signing a prenup, what's going on. Now, Michael obviously has money, so he's entering the relationship with funds, and it is a concern for him. But I understand why it's important. But I wouldn't give up on somebody you love that quickly. You got to fight for her. Jamie, in a private healthcare system, what would happen to people with disabilities, people denied claims, people with mental health conditions? What percentage of people do you think wouldn't be able to get insurance? And should government pay for them? So let me start with the final question. The final one is no. Government has no role here. No role in any of this. So whatever solutions we come up with, government cannot be a part of the solution because none of these issues justify the use of coercion, justify the use of force. The fact that you have a disability does not give you a right to my stuff, does not give you a right to use force against me, even if you're using that force indirectly by hiring the government to come and after me. So it cannot be that the government is the solution. So what's left? Well, what's left is us, society, people, individuals. Start with the fact that people have families. Families will take care of people with disabilities. Families will take care of people who for some reason can't get insurance. That's part of what families do. That's part of the job of families. And in a world like that, I have to mention, we would also be quite a bit richer. I think it's important to note. Imagine how much less taxes you would be paying if healthcare was truly private. And by the way, health insurance would be a lot cheaper. Now, it would only cover you mostly for catastrophic stuff, but it would be a lot cheaper. The whole healthcare industry would be completely restructured and would be more affordable and cheaper. And you would be richer. And that's important to take into account in all of this. Now, if family doesn't exist, or family doesn't have the money, or family can't do it, then charity. There would be charitable institutions that would take care of people. Hospitals would have charity wings that have charity funds. Doctors might have that, where they see a certain number of patients gratis. They do a certain number of operations without charging. Charity would have to take care of patients. What percentage of people do you think wouldn't be able to get insurance? I think after a while, you'd have to let the system grow and mature and markets to adjust and markets to get created. In a mature free market healthcare system, I think the number would be close to zero. And I'm serious. Because there would be so many different types of insurance. And there would be so many different ways in which to insure against not having insurance. That almost nobody, very, very few people would have would not be able to find some form of insurance to cover them. And remember, insurance would be really, really cheap. In America today, if you had no regulations on insurance, a catastrophic insurance policy costs less than your cell phone bill. And everybody has a cell phone. Everybody pays that bill. Everybody could pay for your health insurance. Maribel says, I'm hoping most students take the Dr. Mommy inductive biology course and cure disabilities. Yeah, take the Dr. Mommy induction biology course. Where is that? Where do people take that? They take that on YouTube? How do they find it? Dr. Mommy? All right, Andrew. Didn't expect you to tie altruism to envy. Very interesting. You didn't expect that? Seems obvious to me. I'd also add envy that collectivists compare with others is an unhealthy zero-sum way. Others gain are not the threat to me and can be an inspiration. Okay, so yeah, that's another way in which collectivism, that is, collectivism teaches us to look always at other people and evaluate everything relative to other people. And that means that we start looking at others. How much money do they have, and what kind of car do they drive, and all of that. And then it's about keeping up with the Joneses. And then when you can't keep up with the Joneses, then you resent them, and that builds up the envy around them, and that collectivism encourages. Whereas individualists don't care about what the neighbors have. They're focused on what they can create, what they can build, what they can have, what they can make. And what the neighbors have, the neighbors have. They're not taking it from me. Generally, zero-sum mentalities and zero-sum perspectives encourage envy because other people's success comes at seemingly my expense. That's the meaning of zero-sum. All right, guys, 4 more $20 questions and we make our goal, our second hour goal. Let's see if that can happen. We could also do 8 or 9 $10 questions, but faster if we do the $20 questions. Islam Ali, can cheating be forgiven? Well, I mean, it depends. What do you mean by cheating? What is it that is unforgivable about cheating? Is the deception unforgivable? Is the lying unforgivable? Or is having sex with somebody else unforgivable? Which one of those are unforgivable? And to me, the lying and deception might be unforgivable. That is, if somebody's lying about it, particularly if it's over a period of time, it's not like it was last week and they only told me about it today. But if it's a pattern of deception and lying, that is unforgivable. If somebody having sex outside of marriage, is that unforgivable? I think it's forgivable. I don't think it's unforgivable. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But, obviously people are going to have different views about fidelity, sexual fidelity, and mine are fairly liberal, if you will. So, I think the expectation of monogamy forever, I don't think it's that important or that substantive. It's the lying and deception, which I think are problematic. And the lying and deception, that's a real violation of what do you call it? Of real virtues, of moral virtues. It's a sign of immorality, and it is a sign of immorality. It's reflective of it's going to apply to other things. Why would you think somebody would lie and deceive you only in one area of life? What about other areas of life? So I'm less concerned about monogamy and sexual exclusivity than I am about lying and cheating, which I think are very difficult to forgive, and they have to be. There would have to be, real. There'd have to be a real context in which you could figure out how to forgive somebody for that. But that would be hard. And I'm not for polyamory. I don't believe in. I don't think you can sustain a marriage with more than one person. I don't think you can sustain relationships with more than one person. I don't think that's possible. But I'm also not, so. I also don't think somebody having a one-night stand or having a relationship with somebody under certain circumstances is such a sin or such a big deal. So I think sustaining intense, loving relationship with more than one person is probably not doable. It's probably too complicated, and it's probably just, I don't think we have enough energy. I don't think we have enough focus. I mean, sustaining a lasting long-term relationship with one person is really, really, really hard. It requires a lot of effort. Sustaining that kind of relationship, with that intensity and that intimacy, with more than one person at the same time, I just don't think is sustainable for very long. But that doesn't mean it necessitates sexual exclusivity. So anyway, I'll let you figure out exactly how that plays out. The value is too intense to share it with a lot of people for more than a short period of time. I'm not saying you couldn't have it for a short period of time. I just don't think you could have it for very long. Jacob, what is your opinion on honeymoon duration? We're thinking of a reception in Taipei, 10-ish days in Japan, and 10-ish in Italy in the fall of 2027. I mean, I have no opinion about that. I mean, that depends on how much money you have, how much time you can be away from work. It depends on how much you like traveling and what you like to do when you travel. And I mean, 10 days in Japan and 10 days in Italy sounds amazing to me. Good for you. I mean, that's great. My honeymoon was, I think it was 2 nights in a hotel in Jerusalem and a nice dinner, because that's all I could afford. I mean, and I had $200 in the bank. I mean, it really, really depends. Depends on what stage in life you are. Depends on how much energy you have. But also how much money you have, right? Jacob, our income split will be 65-35 for most of our life, yet we will need to move around for my job multiple times. Should 401k be split along income lines? I mean, I don't think so. That doesn't strike me as a big enough gap to justify that. I think you should merge your accounts and just split everything 50-50. Remember, while your income split might be 65-35, and she will have to move because of your work, if you have kids, and when you have kids, the division might not be 50-50. Somebody might have to take time off of work. There might be a lot of other things going on where you're not going to divvy everything up 50-50. So, or 65-35. So I would just throw everything into, and you're not going to necessarily spend the money 65-35. So I would generally just put it all into one pool, unless there is real big differences, and 35-65 doesn't strike me as that big, or differences in the wealth you're bringing into the arrangement. But again, there is plenty of, I don't know what that is. There's plenty to there's plenty of optionality here that you get to decide. I don't have strong opinions about any of that. Andrew, conservatives' attitude towards marriage is that you should get married because that's what others do. It's like a tribalistic duty. It's unintellectual, a failure to rationally explain the value. Yeah, I think that's true. It's what everybody's always done. You have to have kids, and marriage is the only way to have kids. Again, Jordan Peterson has this attitude of you want to get married so that the other person takes care of you when you have cancer, which again is which is a value. It's not worthless, but it shouldn't be the reason to. You want to get married so that you have somebody with you, so you're not lonely, because a lot of people don't have that many values and they don't know what to do with themselves. Conservatives might get married again because they believe in sex. Sex should be within marriage, and they don't believe in too much sex. A little bit, but not too much sex outside of marriage. There are lots of reasons why conservatives get married, many of them not very good. Andrew, a great part of having a similar sense of life with another is that it allows for particular interests to differ. It's like the fabric of your souls are interwoven despite different shades overlaid. Yeah, I agree with that. Shapes overlaid. Yes, I agree with that. It's the sense of life is the thing that holds you together. It's the thing that underlies the shared values. It's the thing that emotionally connects you. It's the thing that spiritually connects you. And at the same time, you can have other values, but you always go back to that. Rational Frontier. Reference to my previous question plus more support. Thank you. Appreciate that. Eric, by the way, if you think it was a mistake to marry a non-objectivist, I will have to respectfully disagree. I don't think that. So no disagreement required. Jason, can you spend a minute talking about the morality and the extent of the fees or voluntary taxes we should pay for contracts like prenups and marriage licenses to be covered by the courts? God, I don't know what there is to say beyond, I think in a rational society where the government does not tax you, you would pay in order for a contract that you signed to be enforced by the government, to be enforced by the courts and by the policing power of the government. So beyond arbitration, just straight voluntary arbitration, you, I think, would have to pay a fee, some kind of filing fee. And that filing fee would go to sustaining the courts and the policing power of the government so that they could enforce and that they could spend the money on the trial. I think that is a way. Basically, it's voluntary because you don't have to do it. You can just keep it at arbitration, and it's a way to fund the government by using a voluntary mechanism that does not involve coercion. I don't know if I have much more to say about that than that. Linda, keeping art records pre and post marriage can be very important. Well, art, yes. to the extent art is an asset. I think the art that I had before I was married was a poster, a Salvador Dali poster. That was all the art I had before I got married. And the funny thing is, my wife had exactly the same poster. It's one of the things that we connected on. She had exactly the same poster in her bedroom as I had in mine. So, yes, but if you have any asset, including art, keeping records of that and putting it into the prenup makes sense. And talking about how you want to divvy up that art if you ever get divorced and divvy up all the art you're going to purchase together. There's a lot of that. We need more Yaron Brook law. What is Yaron Brook law? Give me an example of Yaron Brook law. Lore. I don't know what that is. Okay, I guess this is the last Super Chat question. So if you still want to ask a question, if you're still interested in any of this, jump in. I Like Numbers says, since you've called for EU media to publish Muhammad cartoons, maybe you could put them on your website to set an example. I mean, I did years ago, yeah, I mean, I don't know where I would put them on the website, but I certainly would put them up when the occasion occurred and when they become news. I would certainly do that. But yeah, I mean, I think if there's an appropriate place on my website to put them, maybe with a video next to a video with them. I used to have. I think the thumbnail. Some of the thumbnail I had for a show I did on the cartoons had the cartoons, so it was always up on my YouTube channel. It's still up, I think. It's still up there, I think. Jamie, also on prenups, if I ask her for one and she doesn't want one, we're both essentially saying we believe there's a chance it will fail. How do you figure out who's right and who should get their way? I don't think there's a formula for that. I mean, look, the possibility of failure is a fact. It's not an opinion. You don't know what the future holds. You just don't. That is a reality. You cannot predict the future with certainty. And the possibility of failure is just facing up to reality. It's being objective. It's being rational. What to do about it is the question. Should you have a prenup or shouldn't you? And here, I think you have a discussion, a discussion about why she's opposed to it. What is it about that she doesn't like? What is it about that that worries her? How can you deal with those worries, deal with her concerns in a rational, building kind of way? So I wouldn't make the fact that she won't sign a prenup, that's it, I'm walking away. That's the beginning of a conversation. And it could be that at the end of the conversation, you decide to walk away, but then it's the nature of the conversation that's going to lead you to that, not the fact that you won't sign a prenup. Maybe she has a false idea what a prenup is. Maybe she has a false idea about what is involved, what could be provisions in it, about how you want to handle the asset distribution or whatever. Have the conversation. Figure out what exactly is going on. One of the most important things about marriage is communication. You've got to communicate. You've got to talk these things out. You're not going to agree on everything. You're often going to disagree. Well, how do you hash out the disagreements? How do you deal with them? Well, this is a good opportunity to start. Okay, Andrew. I'm dealing with the last vestiges of collectivism in my mind with your help. Is it your view that altruism is the essential factor that binds us to others falsely and leads to a collectivistic psyche? I think it usually is, unless you've had a particularly tribal upbringing that kind of skipped over altruism and just bound you to a particular tribe, a particular group. And you can imagine that if you were raised a Mormon and I was just picking on Mormons, or you were raised in Israel, when I was raised in Israel, where a lot of energy is spent on the tribe, the importance of the tribe, the meaning of the tribe, the reliance on the tribe, that everything is engaged with the tribe. Usually goes with altruism because what they're demanding is your sacrifice to the tribe. But it could skip an explicit altruistic theory and just focus on the group and the value of the group and the importance of the group and the fact that you have to be a member and that the group is more important than you. And I think certain tribes, religions, nationalities do a lot of that. And they use guilt in order to achieve a lot of that. So altruism is often there, but I guess not always. Doesn't always have to be at forefront and center of it. Okay, Islam Ali. the discernment in cheating makes perfect sense, but isn't sex tied to love? How can a partner be comfortable with the other sleeping with someone else? I mean, look, sleeping with somebody else is tied to love. It doesn't have to be tied to love. You could be in a situation where there's certain shared values with somebody else, and there is real passion and there's real sexual attraction that does not involve full-fledged love, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not the ideal. The ideal is sex combined with love. But there might be moments in your life, times in your life where, the pleasure that comes from sex, not with somebody that represents no value to you. They have to represent some value to you, but somebody who represents value to you, not just because they're hot. I don't think that's enough. Physical characteristics, I don't think are anywhere near enough, but because something, you've just, I don't know, you've worked closely together, on a project, and I mean, be careful with doing this with a coworker, but there are all kinds of circumstances which bind you intimately with somebody else, and that can result in sex. And I'm just not ready to say that I'm willing to put aside an entire relationship because somebody engaged in that. I just don't think that is right, worth it. Even if you think it's wrong, I don't think it's a wrong that rises to that level. And what if somebody, thought they were falling in love with somebody? There's nothing metaphysical that says you can only love one person at one time. Again, I don't think it's sustainable to love more than one person for very long, but for a short period, it's possible. Anyway, I am far from being an expert on these things, and if we have a psychologist of sex and love, we can ask them for more on this. All right, let's see. I think that's it. I think we covered all the questions. Thank you, guys. Thanks to all the super chatters. Really, I'm thankful for your support. Thank you to Armin, who came in with $100. Really appreciate that. And to Wes, who did 50. Thank you to all the super chatters who asked great questions. I think I got all the stickers. I did. And I will see you guys. I'll probably do something tomorrow. Maybe more newsy, maybe not. You like this show? I mean, this kind of stuff you like me to talk about? Let me know if you like me talking about this kind of stuff. By the way, one of the ways you can let me know you like me talking about this kind of stuff is by reaching our targets on these kind of shows. And then I go, oh, if I talk about like sex and marriage and love and Yaron's rules for life and stuff like that, they really value it because they put their money where their mouth is, where their values are. Their money where their values are, and they show me the love. So that's one way. That's one way to do it, to guide me towards the content that you would like me to talk about. Jacob just chimed in with $5, expressing his preferences clearly. Thank you, Jacob. All right, guys. I will see you all probably tomorrow, but certainly on Monday. And most of next week, I will be traveling towards the end of the week. And see you soon. Bye, everybody.